So now we shall start with first technical session.
Thank you, Divya. Before we proceed to the first technical session, if I could request CA BT Shetty, sir, to present a memento to the young lady who sang the invocation song for us. Can I have Ms. Pavitra on the dais, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Members, we shall proceed with first technical session of today's program. On the topic classification concepts under GST, we have with us CA Viral M. Kandar from Chennai to present on the topic. To give a very brief introduction about her, she is a graduate in commerce and fellow member of ICI. She is also partner at well-renowned CA firm in Chennai. Her first stint as a professional was as a regional credit manager at ICICI Bank for more than 3 years. Although realizing that professional opportunities in banking sector were immense, her affinity to be associated with law, taxes, and accounting and consulting made her renounce the job and join a well-known firm as a manager in direct tax for 3 years. She has co-authored a handbook on GST registration published by ICI, and also she now addresses certain core areas of indirect taxes at the institute with the prospect of enhancing her own skills. With this very, very brief introduction, I wholeheartedly welcome you, ma'am, for today's program. Over to you.
Best.
esteemed members of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India and the Bangalore branch of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Good morning to one and all, and to all the participants here. I welcome you to the 2 days national conference on GST, where certain burning issues, very relevant topics have been decided upon for further deliberation. The topic allotted to me is on classification concepts in GST. So when I say classification concepts, what actually strikes, what comes to your mind? That is very relevant to know. Because classification is not something which is a one-time exercise, which is done for the clients which we are handling. This particular topic of classification is an ever-evolving topic. The reason being that when GST is implemented in our country, though it was planned as one nation, one tax, but when the notifications on the different provisions of the law were notified on 28th June 2017, it came to much of a surprise to us, where we had seen that the tax rate notifications had notified around 6 different types of tax rate only in the case of supplies of goods. In the case of supplies of services also, though predominantly it is at 18%, most of the services, there are some special services taxed at a different rate. So just few days before the GST law was implemented, we had seen that there are multiple tax rates notified. So in fact, the trade and industry had only a few days, just 4 days, to finalize and realign their systems so that from 1st July 2017, they could be compliant with the GST law. So at that particular point of time, when the tax rate notifications had come in, this particular topic of classification suddenly assumed great importance for implementing the GST regime, the GST provisions itself. I would say that classification is the foundation of the GST law. Why? Because we have seen that in the GST law, the distinction between goods and services has been maintained throughout all the provisions. So this again becomes a challenge to first decide whether a particular transaction is to be treated as a supply of goods or a supply of service. So when you are deciding whether it is goods or services, what you are actually embarking upon is nothing but the journey of classification. This is relevant because we have seen there are different provisions of time of supply, place of supply, and also invoicing rules, which are different in the case of goods and different in the case of services. So that is why classification, in fact, would have been the first step for implementing GST in any particular organization. But too much to our disheartenment that it was only notified few days before the GST law could have been implemented. So this, in fact, is another reason why many professionals I have seen have ignored the classification part when they are actually advising their clients. But in spite of it being the most important and the first step of how GST is to be applied to a particular organization, I have seen many professionals who rely upon, who do not even analyze whether it is actually a supply of goods or a supply of service. And if that is going to be the case, then all the provisions which have actually been followed by the particular taxpayer is going to be in, we are not confirmed whether that is the right provision, the provisions have been rightly applied or not. So that is why I would say classification being the foundation step, it is very important that we analyze whether a particular transaction is a goods or service and accordingly decide whether all the other provisions of law have been complied with or not. So we have seen, and I would say, thanks to the advanced ruling decisions under the GST regime, where we have seen multiple decisions which have been passing out orders on the different types of products. Some have even gained the attention of media. We have seen so much of media coverage on different types of classification orders passed by the advance ruling, and in some cases, even divergent rulings. The most famous we would have seen is the Paratha case, whether it is supposed to be considered as a roti or is it as a bread. And we had seen that a 18% tax incidence was ruled on that. So this is how different kinds of products have been given different rulings. Whether a higher rate or a lower rate is a totally different scenario. But that is how classification is very, very important in the GST regime. So what is classification? If you see the GST law, there is no such definition provided for classification, but it is something, if you look at the very general meaning, it's nothing but categorization, sorting, organization of the different products and services into and assigning a particular code for these kind of products and services. That is what is actually classification based upon certain pre-established criteria. That is how goods and services are going to be classified. Why is classification required? Like we've discussed now, it is the foundation step because all the provisions of the GST law directly have an impact on what is the treatment of the particular transaction which you're doing. The taxable object of the particular business needs to be first decided whether it has to take the characterization of goods or services. So that is why classification becomes very, very important. And especially in our country, when we have multiple tax rates prescribed, it becomes important, more important for us to do classification. The whole goal of doing classification would be to find out what is the tax rate applicable to that particular supply. Now, given the different tax rates, it becomes more challenging because you have 6 different types of rates for goods itself. It is not only to find out what is the tax rate applicable, it is also to find out whether there is any exemption available to a particular transaction. So maybe you can take a view that a particular transaction is exempted, but I would like to follow a safer policy. I would still like to go ahead and charge tax on the particular transaction because I do not know. Tomorrow the department can come and contest that no, the exemption was not available to me. And in that particular scenario, I would not have collected taxes. Then the particular tax liability which I'm liable to pay would become my cost. So let me take a safer proposition. I would like to still go ahead and collect and pay taxes. Is this proposition right? Can you decide that I do not want to follow a particular exemption given? I would still like to collect and pay taxes. If you look at the wordings of section 11, an explanation is inserted over there, wherein it says that whenever an exemption is provided by way of a notification or by way of a circular or a note, I would say, sorry, by way of a notification, that particular exemption is to be mandatorily followed. It is not given as a choice to the taxpayer that no, I do not want to follow the exemption. I would still like to go ahead and collect taxes. If this kind of a policy has been taken, wherein I was eligible for an exemption, but I have collected taxes, the department, when it comes up later and says that whatever activities I have been taking is actually exempted, but my defense would be that I have collected and paid taxes. The department would straight away say that whatever taxes you have paid, you have not paid out of your pocket. It has been collected from your customers and it has been paid. So as per section 77, whatever taxes have been collected needs to be paid to the credit of the government. So that in any case will not be eligible as a refund. The next proposition of the department would be to straight away attack the input tax credit which has been taken. Because we know that when an outward supply is exempted, the input tax credit is not eligible to be taken. So the most likely a show cause notice is going to be issued asking you to reverse the input tax credit taken because that activity is supposed to be taken as an exempted activity. So following this kind of a safer proposition will not be right again because it has a direct impact on the input tax credit. And as a business person, it will not be even possible to garner the market share because my product cost would become higher because I'm still charging tax when an item is supposed to be exempted. whereas my competitors would be still following the exemption limit. So this sort of a proposition again is not right. So you have to decide whether you want to follow, whether an exemption is available to you or not. You cannot take the safer route possible. So this is why classification is not only to find out what is the tax rate, it is also to find out whether any exemption is available to you. And if that is the case, given the wordings of section 11, you have to mandatorily follow the exemption. If you look at the GST law, there is no particular section which is telling you that classification has to be done or this is the methodology of doing classification. So how are we today discussing on classification in this particular GST conference? What is the legal framework for classification in GST? For that, we need to look at what is the charging section, which we'll just see in a few minutes from now. So when I talked about classification, I'm sure we've seen so many of these headlines, right? GST slabs, trigger classification views. We in fact had we have the CBIC coming forward and clarifying as to what is a PAPAD and what is a GST rate applicable for that, because of the divergent advance ruling decisions which have been forwarded. Car seats, ready to eat. So what is the difference between ready to eat and ready to cook? What is the difference between sweet corn and maize? What is the difference between gold and bullion? So these are the certain examples which I can think of where you need to first decide what is the nature of the item itself, then only go ahead and look at where the particular HSN code will be applicable for it. Another big discussion which is going on in the industry is fruit juice based drinks. Whether it is supposed to be considered as aerated drinks, carbonated beverages, or whether it will be considered as a fruit juice based drink. What will be the classification? And mind you, what is the tax impact which we will see? It is ranging from 40% to 12%. So that is a great tax arbitrage which has been created when we have this multiple tax rates applicable for a single type of a product. So this is how classification is in fact the most litigated topic. And if you, it's not only in GST, this has also been part of the erstwhile central excise regime and also the state VAT laws, where classification had to be determined what should be the tax rate. So given by the way the advance ruling decisions have been passed in the last 4 years, we think that this ghost of classification issues, disputes, which has been there in the erstwhile regime, is going to haunt us even in the GST regime. So that is why classification becomes very, very important. Another one which we have seen is lassi. Whether lassi has been given the exemption, but something similar to lassi, which being flavored milk, that is not exempted. Again, that creates a tax arbitrage because similar items have different tax rates under the GST regime. So that is how classification is a very, very subjective topic. It all depends upon what is a product. Maybe you have 2 clients from the same industry, but it is not very necessary that the same HSN code or the same tax rate will apply to both these clients of yours, because you need to look at what is a product description and accordingly only then decide. Even a slight variation in the ingredients will actually have an impact on the classification, and you might be having a different HSN code applicable for the same client from the same industry. To give you a little warm up as to how when I'm saying that, there are different tax rates, to just give you a small warm up, I've taken some examples. You can look at chapter 22 over here, which is talking about beverages, spirits, and vinegars. If you look at the heading 2202, that is the HSN code. This 2202 is discussing on waters, including mineral waters and aerated waters, containing added sugar or other sweetening matter or flavored. So this is how the product is described under 2202. Now just imagine if you have a client and your client is manufacturing a carbonated beverage, which is predominantly made out of water, but it is having certain amount of carbonation added to it just to increase the shelf life and also to give a little fizziness to the drink. Apart from this, there is also a fruit flavor added. maybe there are 2-3 varieties of fruit flavors added to that particular drink. Now the client has approached you and is asking you what should be the HSN code for this particular product which I'm planning to launch, which is a fruit juice based drink with carbonation and predominantly made out of water. If you look at the headings of 2202, if you see 22021010, it talks about aerated waters. Then you have another residual entry, which is 22021090, talking about others. Then you have 22029920, which is talking about fruit pulp or fruit juice based drinks. Now the challenge before you is to find out what is the correct HSN code and also to tell you and also tell your client what is the correct tax rate applicable. If you look at the right side of the screen, you can see the different tax rates applicable to these particular HSN codes. So in case if you are deciding that it is going to be aerated water, because yes, predominantly it is made out of water, and yes, there is carbonation also. So then in that case, the tax rate applicable will be 28%, along with the incidence of cess of 12%, taxing that particular drink at 40%. So if you're going to come to this conclusion, I'm very sure your client is not going to be happy because you are suggesting that a particular drink, it might be just say 15 to 20 rupees, has to be taxed at a rate of 40%. So now you want to impress the client. So you do not want to go to that side. You know, your thoughts get skewed towards, because we all ultimately work for our clients. So we want to choose the best rate, tax rate applicable to our client. So we said, no, it cannot be aerated waters. 40% is too high a tax rate for this particular drink. Let me see if it's coming under fruit pulp or fruit juice based drink. That seems to be comfortable. It is at 12%. So the client also will not have any issue when I'm going to tell that, yes, you can tax at 12%. So the code would be 22029920, fruit pulp or fruit juice based drink. Again, yes, the logic applies that it is a drink, it is having a fruit essence to it, so it is a fruit juice based drink. I will classify it under that and tell him a tax rate of 12%. Because you want to keep the client happy and you want a lower tax rate for them. So you've suggested 12%. Lately, I think just last month, a circular has come out clarifying on this particular carbonated beverages, carbonated fruit juice based drinks, wherein the CBIC has said that this will be taxed as aerated waters only with an incidence of 28% tax plus 12%. So this circular has come in 2021. GST last 4 years has passed by. So now your client is going to have this issue of having a demand for the last 4 years. The differential tax, which of 12%, is what now the client needs to cough up. And do you think, are they going to be able to collect from their customers? I'm sure not, because it's all going to be mostly B2C. So this is now a throat in your client's, a thorn in your client's throat, wherein now they have to pay up the balance differential duty along with interest and penalty. It might even lead to the business being shut. The business would not be able to survive at all with such a big differential, because margins are very less. So there's no chance that 12%, it might not even be the margin which you would have earned on that particular drink. So that is how these small cases can cause a lot of disputes, especially when you're coming to classification. So you can see just with small subheadings and additional digits within the heading of 2202, you have 3 different types of tax rates. You further decide, no, let me not tell them it is a fruit juice based drink. I will classify it under the residual category. I'll say it is not aerated waters, it is not fruit pulp or fruit juice based drinks. Let me classify under others and let him pay 18% tax on that particular product. Here you have to see that each and every heading of this particular customs tariff will have the residual category called others. So it's not that you can just straight away take the benefit of saying that, no, I do not know what is fruit pulp based drinks. I do not know what is aerated waters. I will go and classify it under others and tell them to pay 18% tax. This residual category has to be very, very carefully used. In fact, there is a circular by the customs authorities wherein they say that residual categories classification shall not be resorted to when there is a specific heading available for the particular product. So after you've explored all your options and then you still are not able to classify, then you can come to this residual category of others and classify it over there. The challenge becomes more difficult if your client is now launching a drink which is having a lemon flavor, because you have a separate heading of lemonade itself under 22021020. That again is having a tax rate of 28%. So now whether it is a lemonade, whether it is a fruit pulp or fruit juice based drink is a very big challenge which you need to know. So that is how classification, small tax rate differences, a small change, even if you are in the correct heading, a small change in the subheading or the fifth or the sixth digit of classification can change the whole game of business for your client. To further explain this, it is not an aerated drink. Maybe now the client is scared. I do not want to launch any of these aerated drinks. I'd rather launch another drink which is milk based. Maybe that the classification should be easy. So now he comes to you and says that I want to launch a drink which is made out of milk, and I'm going to add some flavors, maybe some dry fruits, some sugar, sweetening matter is added to it. This is a drink which I'm planning to launch. So now again, you have the challenge to decide what should be the classification of this milk-based drink. Whether, and when you look at the customs tariff act, you can see there's a whole chapter dedicated to dairy products. Chapter 4, as you can see on your screens. In chapter 4, you have different types of milk. Now, whether milk and cream, added with sugar, added with sweetening matter, added with flavor, accordingly the HSN codes keep changing. So now you have to see whether it will be falling under chapter 4, wherein the tax rate can be exempted, or it has a small percentage of only 5% tax rate. Or if you go back to 2202, you can see a heading which says beverages containing milk taxed at 12%. So when you were discussing about this aerated water drink, you saw this, there's one HSN code which says beverages containing milk. That is at 12%. But chapter 4, talking about milk, it is taxed at 5%. So now you will be thinking that this is a beverage containing milk. Yes, milk is in the same form. It just some flavor is added to it, some color is added to it, and some sweetening matter is there. But when I look at it, it still continues to remain milk. So yes, I can go ahead and classify under chapter 4. And I'll say that this is milk, is just little flavor added to it. So it will be classified at 5%. Again, this you would have seen. There have been so many ARs. In fact, the Karnataka State Advanced Ruling Authorities has clarified this. They have passed a decision saying that flavored milk will be treated under 2202 as a beverage containing milk. Now, a simple term of beverage is what you need to decide, and that will decide what should be your classification. So what is a beverage and what is a drink? Here, beverage containing milk is taxed at 12, and otherwise it is at 5%. So these simple regular terminologies which we use, we need to now define and explain to the client, no, it is not milk, it is a beverage containing milk and it will be taxed at 12%. There have been divergent rulings given by Gujarat Advanced Ruling Authorities where they said flavored milk continues to remain milk only. So it will be classified under chapter 4 and taxed at 5%. But in my view, if you look at the particular headings of 0401, you will see that they are talking about milk, they are talking about sugar or any sweetening matter to be added. But there's no discussion about any flavor. But the client of mine has got a drink, say with some pistachio flavor or badam flavor is added to it. So then in that case, when there is a flavor being added to it, it does not remain milk. It changes and becomes a beverage containing milk. And then it be taxed at 12%. So this is a challenge now which you need to undertake. So when I talk about goods, yes, multiple tax rates, there's more issue of classification, but it is not that services are kept away from these classification disputes. The most simple being food, accommodation, and beverage services. Again, this particular entry, heading 9963, has been subject to so many changes in the last 4 years. If you look at what it was then in 2017, and you look at it today, the entries have totally changed. So now when if your client is starting a restaurant business, you now need to determine whether there is any accommodation services attached to it, whether is it a standalone restaurant or is it part of an existing accommodation service provider. What is the room tariff charged by that particular accommodation, that particular hotel? That will determine what is the tax rate this restaurant has to charge. So without getting into the facts, I've seen many cases where, people call you on the phone. They just randomly give you some few facts and tell you to tell what is the tax rate applicable to that particular product or to that particular service. This, I feel, as professionals, will be a very, very disastrous thing which we would be doing, wherein we do not look at, we do not peruse the product physically. We do not look at the manufacturing process. And when it comes to services, we do not look at what are the terms of the contracts. What the client tells us will be much, much different than what is actually made out in the agreement. So without perusing the agreement, without perusing what is the processing, without perusing what are the terms on, and other terms, how the consideration is going to flow, if we are going to jump into and come to the conclusion of what is the tax rate, we are taking a very, very big risk with the client. So I advise to all professionals, do not decide upon classification over a phone call. And these days you get queries on classification over WhatsApp. What is the rate of tax for water? Now, if you look at the chapters of water, you can see there are so many types of waters, aerated waters, whether it is being sold in cans or unit containers, whether it is free flowing water, whether it is natural or mineralized water. You do not know, but the query posed to you is what is water? And you are we as professionals will be so bent upon immediately answering to the question which is posed to us. That is not the right way we approach classification. And whatever little experience I have in the last 5 years of dealing with classification, I humbly advise you all to please have a look at the product, how it is being made, what are the raw materials, what is the manufacturing process. And till date, I have not answered a query on classification without actually looking or even visiting the factory premises of the client to understand what is the process flow. In fact, as latest as yesterday, I got a query on what should be the tax rate for chicken, mutton, or these kind of frozen foods. If you look at it, the client expects you to know the tax rates by head on your fingertips. But if you look at the notifications, around 30 pages notifications, how do you expect to know each and every HSN code and what is the tax rate applicable to it? So when I asked how is it being sold? It took him at least 15 to 20 minutes to explain what is the whole business transaction. And at the end of it, I could get to sense that, they're getting restless. They think that we do not know the subject and we are asking too many questions. But I feel whichever professional asks too many questions, the client is going to be in the safe hands of those professionals. So when I got to know that the client, the way it wanted an exemption, but the way the manufacturing process and the way it is being selling this raw meat was totally different, and might be that the exemption will not be eligible for them. So again, we need to know what is frozen, what is chilled. This particular client was having frozen meat and chilled meat. So now you need to know what is the freezing point. Anything below 0 degrees, whatever is being stored, will be considered as frozen. That means there should be some sort of ice formation on that particular carcass. If it is not so, it can be considered as chilled. If it is fresh and chilled, then there is an exemption. But if it is going to be frozen meat, then there is no exemption. Straight away, a tax rate of 18% applies. So here, these are the facts which you need to get. Please, any question on classification, any question on what is the HSN code or the tax rate, please pose back a lot of other questions to your clients so that you know the facts which are correct. And then you come and to decide upon classification. This particular exercise of classification needs to be done very, very independently. If you are going to skew your thoughts towards what is the tax rate and try to satisfy the client, then maybe we are not doing the right thing for our profession and for us as professionals itself. So undertake this exercise of classification in a very, very independent manner, where you assess both the ways in a very independent manner. In fact, the client had come up and told to me that, ma'am, you have not yet confirmed whether an exemption is available or not. I said, it's not possible to say something in a 15-minute call. I need to first look at what is the manufacturing process. I need to look at what is the packaging. How are you marketing the product? That again plays a very, very important role because that is how the organization looks at the particular product. So without all these things, I will not be able to come to a conclusion. Yes, you might be following an exemption, but that cannot cloud my thinking to say that, okay, I will have to somehow get you fit into that particular exemption category. So that's why very, very independently, you need to undertake this exercise of classification. So when it comes to services, we have seen in the case of restaurant businesses, depending upon the room tariffs, depending upon whether it's a standalone restaurant or whether it is part of an existing premises, the classification would change. So is the case with, what's the difference between renting or leasing? That is a very thin line of difference. And you can see there are so many decisions in the erstwhile service tax era where they have tried to demarcate the difference between hiring and renting, or hiring, renting, and leasing. This becomes another big challenge. Say, for example, your client is in the business of providing rental cars, but he is not going to provide a driver with it. It is going to be self-driven cars. In this case, what would be the tax rate applicable? If you look at the entries in the tax rate notification, there are two headings, 9966 and 9973. 9966 deals with rental services with operator, and 9973 deals with rental service without operator. So in this case, when your client is dealing with providing self-driven cars on rental basis, now since it is going to be without operator, it will fall under 9973. Have you look at the tax rates prescribed under 9973? Some entries are having the same rate of tax as applicable to like goods. And what is the tax rate applicable for cars? 28%. And yes, there is another cess component also. So just in case, if you're going to be providing self-driven cars on a rental basis, there are high chances that that particular service can be taxed at 28% because the goods which is being provided on a rental basis has a tax rate of 28%. So that is how you will have to now decide. Because in this particular 9973, you have 12%, you have 18%, as well as rate of tax as applicable to like goods. So these are the different types of tax rates applicable. So these are the small instances which I am just quoting them. I do not want you to reach to a conclusion or maybe say that, no, it cannot be at 28%, it's not possible. I just want you to get thinking on these particular aspects. In fact, classification, as we discuss and we see many more examples, there are high chances that you will differ with whatever is my conclusion, and I might have the same thing with yours. But this is how it is going to be because it's a very, very subjective topic. All of us cannot agree on this one particular tax rate without even looking at the different the facts of the case or even the HSN entries. So now what is the legal framework? If you see, there is no section in the GST law which tells you to do classification. So that is another reason why most of our professionals have ignored this classification. And we totally rely upon whatever the client has followed. So classification is indirectly brought into GST through the charging section, which is section 9 of the central GST law, which says that subject to the provisions of subsection 2, there shall be levied a tax called the CGST on all intrastate supplies of goods or services of both, on the value determined under section 15, and at such rates not exceeding 20% as may be notified by the government on the recommendations of the council and collected in such manner. So we know that the tax rates are going to be notified, and for that we need to refer to the notifications to see, drawing power from this section 9, which are the tax rate notifications prescribed. So we visit the CBIC website, which I'm sure most of us have been frequently visiting given the regular changes. I mean, every day is a new day in GST. There's some new provision, there's some new circular, some notification which has come up. Even the past president has been highlighting the number of notifications and circulars which have been given out in the last 4 years. It seems so that it is more like a delegated legislation. So you don't have to go to the parliament as and when the officers feel like a circular can be brought about. So yes, so we'll visit the CBIC website and then look at what are the notifications issued, notifying the different tax rates, drawing power from section 9. So I stumbled upon this notification 1/2017. That is the first notification of the GST law, which is prescribing the tax rates applicable for goods. And you can see the amount of corrigendums attached to this particular notification itself. So this notification, if you look at the number of changes which has been made over the last 4 years, given the fact that the government is trying to rationalize the different rates. In fact, now a group of ministers have been constituted, which is looking into how exemptions can be withdrawn and how a higher rate of tax can be prescribed so that the revenues can increase. And in what I read from the media is that the 15% slab is they want to make the tax slab from 12% to 15% and the 18% to 20%. So that is what is the proposals given by the group of ministers. But we'll have to see how GST Council takes this up. So yeah, looking at the tax rate notification, we have 1/2017, which is prescribing the tax rates applicable for the goods. And you can see the amount of changes which is being made to this particular parent notification. This notification is telling you that in exercise of the powers conferred under Section 9, the central government on the recommendations of the council hereby notifies a rate of central tax of 2.5, 6, 9, 14, 1.5 and 0.125. So this came, like I told you, on 28th June 2017, 4 days before GST was going to be implemented. 6 different types of tax rates being notified. But one welcome thing in this particular provision, in this particular notification was, they have indirectly made Customs Tariff Act applicable to the GST law also. So that whatever principles have been pronounced by the courts on classification disputes in the erstwhile regime continue to apply even in the GST regime. So you can rely upon those judicial precedents to decide upon classification also. This is done by way of inserting a small explanation towards the end of the notification. If you look at explanation number 3, it says tariff item, subheading, heading and chapter shall mean respectively a tariff item, subheading, heading and chapter as specified in the first schedule to Customs Tariff Act. Something great, something remarkable which is being done here, where Customs Tariff Act is being made in applicable to the GST regime. So why do you think the Customs Tariff Act is being made applicable to the GST regime? Customs Tariff Act 1975 is fully aligned with the Harmonized System of Nomenclature. That is what HSN stands for, Harmonized System of Nomenclature. That is all we are actually trying to do through classification, find out what is the HSN code for the particular product. So when Customs Tariff Act is fully aligned with the Harmonized System of Nomenclature, now this HSN coding system has been formulated by the WCO, that is World Customs Organization based in Brussels. So this World Customs Organization has taken up this painstaking task of providing a code to each and every product available under the sun across the globe. Whatever products are available, a HSN code is being prescribed to that. So when India made the Customs Tariff Act, they adopted this Harmonized System of Nomenclature coding system by the WCO. And wherever required, small tinkering was done to suit local products. Like if you see in the case of mangoes, we know in India there are so many different types of mangoes available. So obviously WCO is not going to prescribe a code for each and every local produce of mangoes. So when the particular HSN code of mangoes, India has added further digits to that particular heading of mangoes to classify all the different local products of mangoes available in the country. So this HSN coding system is a 6-digit code formulated by the WCO. So when India adopted this, WCO allows India or any other contracting party to add further digits based upon whatever is their local requirement. So now India has made a 8-digit HSN code available to us. If you look at the US, they have gone one step further. They have taken up a 10-digit code. So apart from the 6 from the HSN, they have gone into minor classification and subclassification so that they have full control over what kind of goods are being bought or sold, exported and imported, because that is the amount of data which they require. India has stopped with 8-digit HSN codes. So this 8-digit HSN code is mentioned in the in the Customs Tariff Act, which is fully aligned with the Harmonized System coding system. So when this Customs Tariff Act is being implemented into GST by way of the small explanation given under this notification, what it does is it makes India at par with all the other countries. So just because the indirect tax landscape has changed in our country, it does not mean that we should have our own types of formulation, our own coding system for the different goods. Like how it was in the case of state VAT laws, where you had a different notification for a different schedule for these particular goods which are being bought or sold in particular states. So when this WCO Customs Tariff Act is being implemented in GST, whatever goods are being bought or sold, say in the US, the same code will apply even in India, at least up to the first 6 digits. Then if there is another change by way of additional digits being added, yes, you can follow that. So now India is at par with all the other countries. And this in fact is a great opportunity for us as professionals, because we can advise clients based in, say, Europe or US or China or Indonesia, anywhere, where we can still help them with classification, because we are all speaking the same language, because the Customs Tariff Act is fully aligned with the WCO. So this is something remarkable which is being done in GST. So you can even rely upon the judicial precedents. So here it says that 6 different schedules being made in the tax rate notification, wherein they're saying that you have to match the description of the goods along with the chapter heading, subheading also. So when you match both of these things, that is when your classification comes to a stop and you have arrived at the final conclusion. So we have 6 different schedules. You have to match the description as well as the chapter heading. If you look at explanation 4, it says the rules for the interpretation of the first schedule to customs tariff, including section and chapter notes and general explanatory notes, shall, so far as may be, apply to the interpretation of this notification. Again, something remarkable, where they say that the rules of interpretation, section notes, chapter notes, general explanatory notes, and these are all the additional tools of classification which has been applied and made applicable even in the GST regime. So you can look at the Customs Tariff Act, look at the section notes, chapter notes, and everything can apply. But there is a small disclaimer in this particular explanation which says, shall so far as may be apply to the interpretation of this notification. That is, when you are having some dispute between the description of goods given in the Customs Tariff Act and the description of goods given in this particular GST notification, then it will be the GST notification description which shall prevail over the Customs Tariff Act. So yes, you can rely upon the Customs Tariff Act to do your classification. In case of any disputes, GST law, the GST notification shall prevail. So this particular explanation gives you additional tools. So we are going to look at what is section notes, chapter notes, general explanatory notes. I'm sure you would not have come across these terms before on classification, but these things give you a lot of insight into what is a beverage containing milk, what is aerated waters. Now we've seen what is sweetening matter. So whatever explanations whatever examples we had seen, these particular section notes, chapter notes will give you a lot of insight as to how do you define what is a beverage. Okay. So the same thing is in the case of services. You have a different notification, which is 11/2017. So 1/2017 and 2/2017 dealing with goods. 1 is a tax rate notification. 2 is an exemption for goods. 11 is tax rate for services and 12 is exemption for services. So like we had seen, classification is not only to find out what is the tax rate, you also need to find out whether any exemption is available. So maybe you look at the tax rate notification and you see that, yes, my product is not covered here. Then you can look at the exemption notification and see if any exemption is being provided to them. So you can make a note of these particular notifications, which you need to look at to find out what is the tax rate or exemption applicable. But please note, please follow the latest amended notification and not the one which was actually introduced in 2017. So when we look at the explanation given under the goods notification, we said that the Customs Tariff Act is being made applicable here. But what happens in the case of services? Because we know that Customs Tariff Act does not deal with classification of services. It is only dealing with goods imported or exported, what is supposed to be the HSN code applicable. So when it comes to services, which is notification 11/2017, towards the end, it says that reference to chapter, section, or heading, wherever they occur, unless the context otherwise requires, shall mean respectively chapter, section, and heading in the annexed scheme of classification of services. So please note the distinction over here. In the case of goods, you need to refer to the Customs Tariff Act. But in the case of services, they're referring to something called as an annexure. So when you look at this CBIC website, under 11/2017, you can see an annexure which is attached to this notification, which ideally should have been forming part of the main notification itself, but it is given as an annexure. This annexure is going to tell you the SAC code, that is a service accounting code, which needs to be followed in the case of services. This annexure, so you will not refer to the you will not refer to the Indian Customs Tariff Act. You will have to refer to something called as this annexure. And this annexure looks like this, where you can see that it is starting with chapter 99. So anyone can tell me why it starts with 99? What about 1 to 98? Sorry? Exactly. 1 to 98 is the code allotted for goods. If you look at the Customs Tariff Act, there are 98 chapters. So from 1 to 98 is dealing with goods. So they have come up with 99 and made this as applicable only for all types of services. So whenever you receive an invoice, if it's starting with the SAC code 99, that means it is being treated as a supply of service. Now, if you look at the the Harmonized System of Nomenclature coding system by WCO, this is not part of the WCO's formulation. WCO undertook the exercise of only classifying different types of goods. Then how did this chapter 99 come across? How did India make this? Just like how WCO undertook this exercise, you also have the United Nations who also undertook this exercise of classifying. They went one step ahead and they did classification for goods as well as for services. So that is called as a United Nations Central Product Classification, UNCPC. So what India did is they did not look at the goods part, they adopted the service portion of the United Nations CPC for classifying different types of services within our country. And in that UNCPC also, 1 to 98 belongs to goods and 99 belongs to services. So that particular SAC code now has been taken into for classifying services. Under 99, you can see different sections, headings, and groups, and so on. And the number of digits attached to number 99 keeps increasing. You can see 99, section 5. So it's been 9954, dealing with construction services, and so on. Under that, you have different types of construction services and so on. So like this, you have 5 different broad sections of services under which different further subclassifications has been done. So now when you come to classification of goods, we've been discussing about the Indian Customs Tariff Act 1975. They say that you need to refer to the first schedule to the Customs Tariff Act. So what is this Customs Tariff Act? I would suggest that if there is an occasion of advising clients on tax rates, or whether you are specializing in a practice of GST or you're planning to develop a practice in GST, please invest in buying this Indian Customs Tariff Act of 1975. Any author is fine. Buy the latest version, because that is going to tell you how to look at classification. In fact, you will not be looking at the notification as much as you will be looking at the Customs Tariff Act to find out what is the HSN code applicable. So you buy this Indian Customs Tariff Act 1975, and you will now have to refer to the first schedule to find out the HSN code. So this whole, I can just summarize whatever we've spoken so far, is that when you're looking at to find out what is the HSN code and the tax rate, you do not need to refer to the GST law, at least for the initial part. You straight away jump into the Customs Tariff Act, look at the section notes, chapter notes, read the different headings, find out the HSN code, borrow that HSN code, come back to the tax rate notification 1/2017 and see where that HSN code is classified under which schedule. We have seen 6 different types of tax rates. So whichever schedule it falls under, that will be the tax rate applicable. So that is how basically we'll go about classifying in the case of goods. The first schedule to Customs Tariff Act is divided into sections, chapters, headings, subheadings, tariff items. I'm sure we've seen all this in the academic part of our careers. But it's when you will actually appreciate what all these sections, chapter, heading, subheading, and tariff item mean. So when a particular code is being assigned, then there are different types of chapters, sections created. So what World Customs Organization did is the whole gamut of products available across the globe, they have divided into broad sections. So like this, you have 21 sections in the first schedule to Customs Tariff Act. Under the 21 sections, you have 98 chapters. Then you have around 5,000 headings and close to 7 to 10,000 subheadings and tariff items. So that is the amount of work which has gone into finding and assigning a particular HSN code for a particular type of product. So to better appreciate that, say for example, you're looking at the HSN code for roses. So I have found out that the HSN code applicable for roses is 06031100. That is how I would read the HSN code. So now here 06 stands for the chapter. 03 stands for the heading. So when I open the Customs Tariff Act, the 6th chapter would belong to roses. The third heading under that particular chapter 6 would be deciding again about roses. The subheading under 03, that is the 11th heading, and the 00, which is another digit being added to make it an 8-digit code, that will be the HSN code for roses. So that is how you will see 0603, 6th chapter, 3rd heading, 11th subheading. That is how you will read it. So when I say 21 sections, broad grouping of the different products available, right from live animals to a manufactured ship, aircraft, vessel, arms, ammunitions, everything has a HSN code prescribed in the Customs Tariff Act. So you have section 1 dealing with live animals, and then you have section 21 going up to works of art, collector's pieces, and antiques. So that is how broad grouping of different products has been done. So these section numbers help you to navigate these voluminous pages. When you buy this Customs Tariff Act, you will see that it comes in 2 volumes and almost consisting of 1,000, 2,000 pages. So how are you going to find out what is the HSN code? This section grouping helps us to navigate and not go through all the entries. You can see where your product could be classified. And then inside that, you go further and look at all the different chapters, headings, and subheadings. So you have section 1 dealing with live animals, section 2 dealing with vegetable products, and so on. If you look at, again, the way these chapters are arranged, now, it's not something which is very arbitrary done by WCO. They just took all the products and just maybe alphabetically arranged all the products or something like that. These particular sections, if you look at it, it is arranged in the increasing order of manufacturing. So something which is live, something which is naturally available will be at the beginning of the particular section. Like you have section 1 dealing with live animals and animal products. Then you have vegetable products, fruits, then food preparations, vinegar, spirits, beverages, and so on. Then coming to section 19 dealing with arms and ammunition, and 21 dealing with works of art and so on. So these sections have been arranged in the increasing order of manufacturing required on those particular goods. And WCO does not stop only at the section levels. This particular principle has been followed even at a heading, subheading level. So it's a very, very scientific approach what WCO has done to HSN coding system. And thankfully, India has even aligned the Customs Tariff Act to the GST regime also. So when I look at, say, section 2, okay, we had seen section 2 dealing with vegetable products. Under that, you have chapter 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So each particular chapter under vegetable products will be dealing with some sort of basic, another grouping of vegetable products is being done. Like chapter 6 dealing with live trees, 7 with edible vegetables, 8 edible fruits, coffee, tea, meat, and spices under chapter 9, and chapter 10 with cereals. So you can see how vegetable products have been further subgrouped into different chapters. If I open chapter 10, talking about cereals, I can see for wheat, there's a different code. For rye, barley, oats, maize, rice. Again, different types of cereals have again been further subdivided at a 4-digit code. So this is 1001 is nothing but the heading. That is the HSN code which is being prescribed even under the GST regime. For all invoices, we need to code up to from 4 to 6-digit codes depending upon the turnover. Then when I look at rice, it is further divided into rice in the husk, husked brown rice, and so on. So that is how, again, the further sub-classification has been done. So what my aim of classification would be is to find out what is this 8-digit code applicable, and then look at what is the tax rate by looking at it in the tax rate notification. Then we had seen certain tools which has been prescribed, right? Rules of interpretation, section notes, chapter notes, and other explanatory notes. So do you think that, okay, you're going to buy the the Indian Customs Tariff Act, and you have the GST notifications, you're just going to read through and yes, you'll be able to come to a conclusion. Most likely that you're going to land up with at least 3 HSN codes where you think your product could be classified. You are not at all going to be possible, at least in the first round, you're not going to be able to find out the first HSN code applicable, and at least be confident that yes, this is going to be the correct HSN code applicable. So how do you then, filter out what is the unnecessary codes and come to the right conclusion? For that, we have these particular tools of classification, which is the section notes, chapter notes, rules of interpretation, and the explanatory notes. So all these are going to help you to do a sort of filtration to whatever codes you have thought your product could be classified under. So now section notes and chapter notes. Yes, when you buy the Indian Customs Tariff Act, section notes and chapter notes will form part of that particular publication itself. So before the headings start, before the particular chapter, you're going to have certain chapter notes there. Just before the section starts, you're going to have section notes. You have to mandatorily read these section notes and chapter notes, because that is going to tell you what is the scope of the different terminologies used inside this particular heading. Like in the case of beverages containing milk, aerated waters, you do not know what is included, what is excluded. You need to look at the section notes and chapter notes, which is going to give you a lot of insight of what does those terminologies actually stand for. The judicial precedents from the erstwhile regime, the Supreme Courts, the High Courts, the tribunals, all have decided that section notes and chapter notes, there are many case laws available also, which says that section notes and chapter notes are a safe bet for doing classification. So even the courts have relied upon the section notes and chapter notes to come to a conclusion on classification. And thankfully, it is forming part of the existing publication of Indian Customs Tariff Act itself. Then you have something called as an explanatory notes. Okay. Now this is something which is not part of the Customs Tariff Act, but it can be relied upon to do classification. In fact, in the GST regime, you can see all the advanced ruling authorities have used these explanatory notes to sort out all confusions on classification. So what is this explanatory notes? This is a totally separate publication. Like you have this HSN coding system by WCO. Apart from that, WCO has also published this HSN explanatory notes. This HSN explanatory notes is a commentary given by the World Customs Organization as to what is the thinking which they had when they made this coding system. So all those kind of explanations, any further clarifications is available in these explanatory notes. So again, as professionals, if you see scope in classification practice, I would suggest you to buy these explanatory notes also. Yes, very expensive. You can buy these from the WCO's website itself, and yes, it will get delivered to your office. These consist of 5 voluminous books, which have detailed explanation of what each and every heading stands for by the WCO. The question came up before the courts, whether the explanatory notes are legally binding. Can we rely upon explanatory notes to do classification? The Supreme Court has held in Woodcraft's India, wherein they have said explanatory notes can be relied upon to do classification. So explanatory notes also have got the legal backing, as well as the section notes and the chapter notes. Apart from this, some other additional tools given, which is the rules of interpretation. Very, very important for you to do classification, because it will help you to come down and boil down to one particular HSN code applicable for your product. 6 rules of interpretation have been prescribed, and we will quickly see through as to how these rules help you to do classification. If I just maybe read the rules, you will not understand it, and we'll take small examples to help you appreciate what is the principle behind these rules. Like I said, do you think finding out the HSN code is going to be so simple? Look at these type of different products. What about parts and accessories? Will you classify it as a part or will you classify it along with the principal item? Sets and kits, different composite products being sold together. Then you have the definition of mixed supply and composite supply in GST, which again is going to haunt us as to how we should do the classification then. Emerging products and trends, new products which have come. Say, for example, now the latest being drone technology. How are you going to classify drones? And certain multi-purpose goods, which is like, say, a speaker, come a phone, come a entertainment device. These kind of multiple functionality products, how are you going to classify all of those? So that classification then in these kind of scenarios becomes very, very complicated. So now looking at the rules of interpretation. So now if you have a product before you, you will look at the Customs Tariff Act. You've read the section notes, you read the chapter notes, you've read the explanatory notes, but still you think your product could be classified under two different items. Say in the example of beverage containing milk itself, you have 2202 and chapter 4. Now these rules of interpretation should help you to do classification and eliminate the one which is not answering or not in line with the principles of classification. So rule 1 says that, like when I said, these voluminous rules, right? These headings are so in detail. So like, if, for example, say Coca-Cola or a Pepsi, you're not going to straight away find a HSN code for that. It's going to be like beverages, aerated waters containing carbonation, fruit, sweetening matter added, and so on. So that's when you have to look at all the different terminologies and find out whether that particular HSN heading is applicable or not. So what rule 1 says it, whenever you're doing classification, say you've come to a conclusion, you looked at this particular chapter note, and you see that yes, this particular heading is applicable. Rule 1 says that go ahead and do the classification based on the heading, subheading, chapter note section, and the section notes. Do not go by the terms of the sections. So what was the hierarchy which we had seen? Section notes, chapters, headings, subheadings, tariff items. That was the hierarchy which we had followed. Rule 1 says the titles of sections, chapters, and subchapters are provided for ease of reference only. For legal purposes, classification has to be done based on the terms of the heading. So when we looked at section 2 dealing with vegetable products, then under the chapters, we had cereals, chapter 10 dealing with cereals. So what they are saying is that titles of these chapters will not help you to do classification. You can't go by the titles of these sections and chapter notes. You have to get inside those particular chapters, look at the terms of the headings, look at the section notes and chapter notes and do your classification based on that. Say, for example, you have before you playing cards. How will you classify playing cards? Now, I looked at the Customs Tariff Act, I think chapter 49, which says products of the printing industry, or whether it is going to be toys and games under chapter 95. I've gone plainly by the heading of the chapters. How do you think you're going to classify this? Rule 1 says, do not go by the titles of the chapters. You have to look at the headings and subheadings and the section notes and the chapter notes. So I open up chapter 49 from the Indian Customs Tariff Act, and I see that this particular chapter note, which is given at the beginning of the chapter, it says, this chapter does not cover, point number C, playing cards or other goods of chapter 95. So yes, my job is done. It's much more easier, right? I do not have to get into chapter 49, see where it can be classified and so on. At the initial stage itself, it has given me an alert saying that your product cannot be classified over here. You please go and see whether it can be classified under chapter 95. So my work is half done. I do not look at chapter 49. I straight away jump into 95, see where my product could be classified and classify my playing cards over there. Had it not been classified over there, then I can come back to chapter 49 and look at the terms of the headings and subheadings. So that is what, looking at the titles of the chapters, it so looked that my product could be classified over there. But that is what exactly rule 1 is telling us not to do. Do not go by the titles of the sections and chapters. So product of the printing industry or toys, games, I will not do the classification based on that. It is given only for ease of navigation. So it is easy for you to come and look at that particular area of the Customs Tariff Act where you can think your product could be classified. Let's take another example, say a children tricycle. How will you classify this? Say your client is dealing with children tricycles, right? So it is under chapter 87, vehicles other than railways or tramway, rolling stock and so on. Or chapter 95, toys, games and sport requisites, parts and accessories thereof. If rule 1 was not there, I will end up into a confusion because they say I would have gone by the titles of the chapters. So now I open chapter 87, and if I look at the last heading, the last note, which says heading 8712 includes all children's bicycles. Other children's cycles fall in heading 9503. So yes, my classification dispute has been sorted out by these chapter note itself, where they say that if it is other than children bicycles, you go and see under 9503. So I will not go under chapter 87. I will look at classification for the children tricycle under chapter 95. That is what rule 1 is saying. So these 6 rules of interpretation, very, very important, sorts out a lot of confusion, saves a lot of time for us. And you have to keep in mind that these 6 rules of interpretation have to be applied sequentially. That is, rule 1 to 4 has to be applied sequentially. 5 is a separate rule dealing only with packing items, and 6, which tells that what kind of headings can be compared. Okay, so when you are coming to a conclusion, or when you have decided that there are 2 particular HSN codes where you think your product could be classified, right? You have to ensure that both the headings are at the same level. So what do you mean by same level? You can't have one heading, one particular HSN at a 4-digit level, and another HSN code at an 8-digit level. You can't compare a 4-digit HSN code with an 8-digit HSN code. That is what rule 6 is telling you. If you are confused, you have to look at both either at 6-digit or both at 4-digit, and then apply these 4 rules of interpretation sequentially to these particular HSN codes. That is what this particular rule is telling us to do. Rule 6, that is. So 1 to 4 applied sequentially. So only when rule 1 fails, you go to 2, 3, and 4. So now in case if rule 1 has failed, you see whether rule 2 can help you. 2A says that any reference in a heading to an article shall include a reference to that article, incomplete or unfinished. So you can see in this case, the scope of the heading has been expanded. So when I say motor vehicles, I see a particular HSN code for motor cars or motor vehicles. It does not mean that motor vehicles has to be in its complete ready to use form. It can also mean in an incomplete or an unfinished form can still get classified along with the motor vehicle. The only condition is that those incomplete or unfinished forms should have the essential character of the complete or finished article. So in case, say, your client is manufacturing only the body of the car, right? The engine is not yet fixed to it, the seats have not, the wheels are not yet fixed to it. But yes, looking at the particular incomplete body of the vehicle, you can see that yes, it is having the essential characteristics of a motor vehicle. So in that case, the code can get classified. The HSN code of a motor vehicle can also get attracted in this case. So again, we have to be double careful, because in incomplete or unfinished forms also can get classified along with the completed article, but the condition is of essential character. The rule further expands the scope by saying that even if it is an unassembled or disassembled form, it can still get classified along with the completed article. Say, for example, you have a cycle, the children tricycle, which we saw. If the children tricycle is fully in a SKD or a CKD condition, semi-knockdown, complete knockdown, and it is being imported by your client in such a manner, so do you think it should be classified as a parts of a bicycle, or whether it will get classified as a bicycle only? If you look at rule 2A, it says that the unassembled or disassembled form should have the essential character. So when it is in a totally dismantled condition, how are you going to determine what is the essential character of that particular goods? When you look at all those parts of the children bicycle, you know that when you assemble this, it is going to turn out to be a children bicycle only. It's not going to turn out to be a tractor, right? So at least the incomplete or the unassembled form is having the essential characteristic of the completed article. So then in the customs, we have so many cases where, people, to avoid duties on, say, motor vehicles, they will import the motor vehicles in a totally dismantled condition. To say that, no, this is not a motor vehicle, this is parts of the motor vehicle. Or this is not a cycle, this is parts of a cycle. This is not a TV, it's a parts of the TV in a totally dismantled condition. But given the powers of rule 2A, they say that the complete unassembled form will also have to be classified along with the completed article only. Say, for example, this is actually a case of Camlin Limited. Very interesting, where they've been manufacturing these crayons, wax crayons. So this is on the central excise regime. So when they are manufacturing these wax crayons, what happened was an intermediate product was being manufactured. Now this intermediate product which was manufactured, the central excise department came up and said, yes, this is a new product which is being manufacturing. So you kindly please, classify this as a new product different from the wax crayons which you're manufacturing and pay excise duty on that. So Camlin Limited was actually classifying this under crayons itself. That is intermediate product, which was Crayplast plastic shapeless crayons. That is, just before the crayons could be set into the shape of a crayon, before it could be frozen or molded into the shape of crayon, that particular wax liquid along with the color was being classified by the department as a pigment. But Camlin Limited said it's nothing doing, it's not a pigment, it has to be classified as a crayon only. So this was a dispute which was there. But going by Rule 2A, Supreme Court held that the Crayplast shapeless, the liquid form of the crayon, is having all the essential characteristics of a crayon. It is just that it is not set into the shape of a crayon. So that is why Supreme Court went ahead and said that that liquid form of the crayon gets classified along with the crayon only by Rule 2A. Incomplete unfinished form having the essential characters of the completed article. Similarly, parts of a wardrobe totally dismantled for ease of transportation, say. So when this is also going to be classified as wardrobe only, given the concept of Rule 2A. Rule 2B, saying that, again further expanding the scope. They're saying that when I look at a particular article in a heading, it does not mean it has to be in its purest form. So when I say gold, it does not mean gold in its purest form. When I see coffee, the HSN code for coffee, it does not mean it has to be coffee in its purest form. Coffee mixed with chicory, we can still be considered as coffee only. That is what Rule 2B is telling me. But if the ingredients are so equal and important in nature, the proportion of both are so equal, then I will not be able to do classification as per Rule 2B and my classification will fail. This rule will fail. I need to go to Rule 3. Say, for example, you are having a plastic vessel which is having a wooden top, or a steel vessel which is having a wooden top or a wooden handle. In this case, how will you do classification? Whether it is articles of steel or is it an article of wood, you will not know how to do classification of these two things. That is when Rule 2B in these kind of scenarios will not be helpful. So straight away you jump and see whether the next rule can apply. Like I said, coffee mixed with chicory, it can still get classified as coffee only. So Rule 3A says that the heading which provides the most specific description shall be preferred to headings providing a more general description. So when I look at two HSN entries, I need to find out which one is more detailedly explaining my product. That should be the HSN code to be followed. So Rule 3A says that specific over general. Some examples, engine parts made of steel. Now I have two HSN codes, 8409 or 7325. 8409 talking about parts suitable for use solely or principally with 8407, or 7325 dealing with other cast articles of iron or steel. Both seem to be applicable for my product. So what Rule 3A says, find out which one is more specific and classify your product there. So in this case, 8409 is more specifically describing and 7325 seems to be a very residual entry description. So I will classify under 8409. Similar is the case with electric shaving machine, 8510 or 8509. I choose the one which is more specifically describing my product and classification will be done in that case. But in the case of the example I gave you of the vessel or the vessel which is having steel and wooden components, again, Rule 3A will not specifically describe my product because I will not know which one is more a specific description. So in that case, Rule 3A also will not help me to do classification. 3B, mixtures, composite goods shall be classified as if they consisted of the material or component which gives them their essential character. So multimedia speakers, it has different functions, right? Bluetooth, FM, wireless mic, USB slot, and so on. How will you classify this particular product? So multi-purpose goods, that is when Rule 3B will help us to do classification. They say find out which one is giving it the essential character. So here, the product as such is being manufactured and sold as tower speakers. So the speakers the multimedia speakers is what is giving this product the essential character, and all other functions are just additional features being sold along with this speaker. So rule 3B is saying go by the one which is giving it the essential character, and this will be classified as a speaker only and not as a sound recording or a reproducing apparatus. So again, in that example, yes, we've not been able to come to a conclusion because rule 3B also is not telling me or helping me to do classification. Another example, say you have a kit which is having all different products, set up together, and you're going to be selling this. Whether you will classify this hairdressing kit, how will you go about classifying this? Hairdressing kit made up of electric hair clippers, a comb, a pair of scissors, a brush put up in a leather case. So each of these items are having different HSN codes. You're combining all of them, putting it in a leather case, and you're going to be selling this. How will what will determine the HSN code for this? So what rule 3B says, go by the one which is giving it the essential character. If you see in this particular example, the clipper, hair clipper, is the one which is giving it the essential character. Why? Because all the other products are ancillary and is going to help me to do the hair clipping exercise. So the main item in this case would be the hair clipper, and that is why the classification has to be done by the one which is giving it the essential character. There will be a small disparity between this rule 3B and mixed supplies definition or composite supplies definitions under the GST law. So if you recall the explanation given over there, they said, shall so far as may be, these rules of interpretation and so on, shall so far as may be apply to the interpretation of notification 1/2017. So yes, going by the rules of interpretation, I will classify this as an electric hair clipper, use that particular HSN code. But when I look at the definition of mixed supplies, where a single price is being charged for all the goods, then I have to look at the one which is charging, which is the highest tax rate that will apply to all the goods given over here. So in my view, rule 3B will not help me to do. I'll have to still go by the mixed supplies definition concept in GST and apply that particular HSN code based upon the definition of mixed supply. So there is a small disparity between these rules of interpretation as per customs tariff and as per the GST law. How would you classify this particular image before you? Is it a keychain with a toy or is it a toy with a keychain? What would be the deciding factor? Something so simple, right? But when it comes to classification, it's very, very challenging because you do not know what will be giving. You will say it's a toy, I will say it's the keychain. So how this product is being manufactured, how is this product is being sold, where it is being in fact placed in a supermarket or in a particular store, all these are deciding factors as to how you should go about classifying this. In my view, again, rule 3B will not help you to do classification because you do not know what is giving it the essential character. So you will have to see whether rule 4 helps you out. Rule 3C saying, go by the one which is coming last in the numerical order. So if you're confused between two rules, you find out the HSN code which is coming last in the numerical order. So this is not like some random rule which has been prescribed, because I had explained to you how these sections and chapters are arranged. So in the increasing order of manufacturing activity required. So that is why they say when you are confused between two HSN codes, find out which is the last in the numerical order, and that will be the code applicable to your product. That is when all the other rules have failed. That is when rule 3C will come. Rule 4, not much of use. I don't see much of this rule 4 being used by any of the courts in the erstwhile regime also. And in case you are planning to use this, please use it with great caution, because it's saying go ahead and classify your goods based upon similar goods available in the market. Most likely you might not find, say in case of new products, you might not find a similarly available goods. So then rule 4 will not help you. And there can be certain features which are different from what is available in the market and what your client is actually manufacturing. So rule 4, you very sparingly use, but they say go ahead and classify based upon akin goods. And that will be the HSN code applicable to your product. Packing goods, packing materials, great challenge, whether the jewelry box which is being sold along with the jewelry, say the necklace or the earrings or the rings, what should be the classification of this packing boxes which is being sold along with jewelry? I'm sure this is going to be a litigation coming up in the future. because most of us would not even have paid attention to how that should be valued, because it's ultimately a different product which is being sold along with the jewelry. And for all you know, there will not be any charges also being levied against that. So does it mean, are you giving it away for free? If that is the case, then the ITC which you have taken in purchasing these cases should be reversed. Right? So that challenge is always going to be there. But yes, coming to classification, Rule 5 says packing materials which are specially designed, shaped to fit that particular main item, you should classify it along with the main item itself. Say, for example, a guitar case. You know, it is used to hold the guitar when you're not in use. It is specially shaped and fitted, suitable for long-term use. So you classify it along with the guitar itself. That is what Rule 5 is telling you. And Rule 6, like we've discussed, when you're classifying two different HSN codes, please ensure that both are at a same level. That is, both have to be either 4-digit or a 6-digit code. I mean, no discussion. I think I'll just take another 5 minutes more and to just discuss on this classification theories. No discussion on classification will be complete without discussing on this trade parlance theory. Okay, we have these rules of interpretation. We have the section notes, chapter notes. Still, there have been so many disputes where the courts, in spite of having all these tools of classification, have not been able to come to a conclusion. That is when the Supreme Court and the High Courts have devised these strategies, these theories to help you to do classification, which is the most famous being the trade parlance theory. That is, you cannot confuse a particular item based on certain technical definitions, right? You have to look at it as how a common man would look at the particular product, how the trade views that product. Classification ultimately has to be done by the trade parlance theory. Okay. For example, I have this Connaught Plaza case, a very landmark decision of the Supreme Court, wherein the dispute was this soft serve ice cream, right, manufactured by McDonald's. Whether it is supposed to be considered as an ice cream or you will consider it as a dairy product. What Connaught Plaza restaurant was doing was, it was treating this item as a dairy product. They said that no, it is not an ice cream at all. And the reasoning behind this was they've done some testings, they've gone into technical details as to what is dairy products, what is the percentage of milk fat content which is supposed to have. You know, looking at all these technical definitions, they've come, their consultant, their professional, their CA has advised them, no, you do not pay excise duty. This is a dairy product, you are exempted from paying excise duty on this particular softy serve ice cream launched by McDonald's. So they have followed that. And when the department came in, they said, nothing doing. This is not a dairy product. When a customer walks into McDonald's or when it walks into a restaurant, what it is looking to buy, it is looking at it, the mental association which it has with this product is an ice cream. So you cannot say that, okay, milk fat content is above so-and-so percentage, so yes, it is not an ice cream, it's supposed to be like this and though. They produce so many technical certificates, testing certificates, and all those lab reports. No, nothing doing. Supreme Court held that how the trade views a particular product, that is how the classification should be done. So they were, in fact, the demand was upheld in this particular case where an excise duty was liable to be paid on all the ice creams it has been sold by Connaught Plaza restaurant. Here they have used a theory of trade parlance theory. So this trade parlance theory will come in when you know the section notes, chapter notes, rules of interpretation. Nothing has helped you to do classification. Then you go by what the trade understands this product as, and that is how you will do classification. Another very, very interesting case, whether Scrabble is a puzzle or a game or a toy. How do you differentiate between a puzzle, game, or toy? Have you ever thought why these different terminologies for games? What is the differentiating factor? What's a puzzle? What's a game? What's a toy? So Supreme Court is having these sort of disputes to sort out, where now the Scrabble, assessee was classifying it as a puzzle, but department said no, it is a board game. So what's the difference between a puzzle and a board game? Again, there will be an incidence. If you look at puzzles, it is taxed at 5. Board games taxed at 18. How will you describe? Simple game of board games. So before the Supreme Court, in the case of Pleasant Time Products also, this case was decided whether Supreme Court has actually went in, looked at all the dictionary meanings, looked at how the product is being placed in the particular gaming store, and then decided upon that Scrabble will be considered as a puzzle and not a board game. right? So they have been differentiated. What is the game and the puzzle? They said that the difference is brought out by three distinct features: outcome, clue chance, and skill. If you look at in a puzzle, the outcome is predetermined and fixed. Say, for example, the crosswords which you do, the jigsaw puzzles, you know what is going to be the end result. So in a puzzle, the outcome is predetermined. But in a game, you are free to decide what, there is no fixed outcome for that case. What about clue chance? We know that, in the case of Scrabble, these coins with different alphabets are given to us. So that's the only clue which we have, and the player has a chance to make any number of words which has a maximum points available. Whereas in the case of crossword, a clue is already given to you. But in the case of a Scrabble, there is no clue available. Skill. Here, in the case of Scrabble, the skill of the player determines how much he can score maximum. He's free to draft any number of words with the available letters given to him. But in the case of a puzzle, that's not the case, because you know that the end result is fixed and you just have to guess what is the word. So that is how Scrabble was decided to be a game and not a puzzle. Then they also applied the trade parlance theory to determine upon this. End-use functional test. Please be very careful when you apply this test. It's not that how the product is ultimately going to be used will determine what is the classification, right? The end-use functional test, unless and until your HSN entries, your section notes, chapter notes tell you to do classification based on that, you cannot go by the end-use functional test classification. Say, for example, I'm a dealer in wires and switches. I'm an electrical items dealer. Just because I'm supplying the wires and switches to a car manufacturing unit, it does not mean that I am a dealer of motor vehicle parts, right? Just because my products are ultimately used in a motor vehicle. So end-use functional test classification, very, very carefully to be used. And only, I would say, the last test to determine what should be the classification. So I would like to stop my session here. I mean, I can discuss more on classification with a lot of examples and all that to make it a little more interesting. But if there are any questions, I would like to take them up now.
Hi, my name is Krishnakant.
Hello, sir.
One of my client is selling electronic jacquard. It's a machinery for manufacture of saris. So he also sells parts of that machinery as well independently. So we had this confusion. His turnover is beyond 5 years, so we had to use that 6-digit HSN. So we were using for the entire machinery a certain code. And when it came to parts of those machinery, we were confused if we could use the same code, or we were not able to find an appropriate code for that specific part. We were pretty confused with that. So how do we deal with this?
Yes, sir. So in case of classification of parts, you have to note that there is section 16 and section 17 has two important notes on how to go about classifying parts. So you'll have to check whether that can be applicable. But to directly address your particular case, I would say that the parts which are being sold separately will not have the same HSN code as the main principal item itself. Because if it was in a totally dismantled condition and you're selling all the parts together, as presented, it is having the essential character of the completed article, then I would use the HSN code of the completed article. But if you're just selling one particular part, then it will have the HSN code of that particular part only. And you will not have the HSN code of the main item itself. Yes, you'll have to look at a different chapter. Maybe it is a different particular parts of general use, maybe. Say it's a screw, or maybe it's a wheel, or an axle, or something which is different. Then you'll have to look at what will be the HSN code for those particular type of products. It is not necessary that it has to be falling within the same chapter itself.
Yeah, we have one online question. Where will dabeli, a popular Gujarati snack dish of India, will be classified? And if a product is not classifiable under any chapter, will it be treated as exempt? That's a question asked by one of the online attendee.
So this item which is manufactured, right, it is a food preparation. If you see, as such, Indian Customs Tariff Act is aligned with the WCO. So you're not going to find a HSN code for dosa, idli, or anything like that. You will have to see how that particular item is being described. Right? So that's why you've seen in the GST regime, a separate HSN code has been carved out for idli batter, because that is how the industry demands it. So to answer that question, the particular item, say, I think is dabeli, right? Yeah, that will be falling under chapter 21, wherein a residual item HSN code is given, 2106 to be precise, which says food preparations nowhere else classified. So after looking at all the HSN codes under chapter 21, all types of items will get classified over there. In fact, namkeens, papads, bhujiyas, mixtures, all that gets classified under 2106, and the tax rate is at 18%, I think so. Depending again whether there's a brand name or not.
Thank you so much,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause.
I think we have.
We
had a
can
question.
take
to
the
time
questions
constraint.
offline due to the time constraints, sir. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause for CA Viral. I request CA Divya S to present her a memento as our token of appreciation. Thank you, ma'am. Next time any of us go to McDonald's and have a soft serve, I think the thought of whether it's a dairy product or ice cream will come to our minds. Thank you so much for taking us through the classification concept beautifully. Thank you for sparing your time with us. We now break for a 15-minute tea break, and we shall resume at 12:30.